Okay, Baltimore City Council Ways and Means Committee. Baltimore City Council Ways and Means Committee, we're here for Council Resolution 24-0228R, Informational Hearing, Vendor Lien Program, for the purpose of inviting representatives from the Office of the Comptroller, representatives from the Department of Real Estate and the City Solicitor to report on the Baltimore City Vendor Lien Program and provide additional information as requested by the committee. I'm Eric Costello, Councilman from the 11th District, Chair of the committee, joined to my far right, Councilman Robert Stokes, 12th District, member of the committee to my left, Councilman Ryan Dorsey, 3rd District, member of the committee, Councilwoman Odette Ramos to my immediate right, Nia Garrett, staff to the committee. We're also joined by members of the Mayor's Office and the Council President's Office. We will start off with Department of Finance. Comments?
No, Mr. Chair. We also have the Director of Revenue, Bureau Chief of Revenue Collections here to answer any questions.
Thank you. Department of Real Estate comment. We'll come back to you. Department of Law, approved for form and legal sufficiency.
Kate Edwards with the Department of Law. I'm joined here with Michael Wieland as well. We stand by our report, and we find it is legally sufficient.
Thank you very much. And then we have Office of Comptroller and Department of Real Estate. So I'll turn it over to the Comptroller. And Mr. Comptroller, I understand that you have a presentation that'll be going up in a moment.
I do, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much,
And
Bill.
Mr. Comptroller, if you could just introduce first and last name and position title of all your folks that are here to testify, please and thank you, and then take it away.
Thank you.
We've also been joined by Council Vice President Sharon Green Middleton, 6th District member of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. We appreciate your attention this morning. I am hopefully going to give the majority of my part of the presentation now by introducing my team, who will then provide the details on our vendor lien program, starting with Eric Evans, Director of the Office of Real Estate. Also joined today by Casey Kelleher, Director of Policy and Communications, Christine Evans, the Deputy Director of Policy and Communications. And then I think, well, technically that's it for people who work directly for me. But we have had a very good partnership with the administration in putting this program together, including help from Michael Wieland and Kate Edwards in the law department. And I believe Dorothy has already been introduced as the Bureau Head for Revenue Yeah, and I think that's it for who we have today. Really, Eric will be doing the bulk of the presentation, and everyone else is here just in case the council has very, very, very specific questions that go to somebody else's area of expertise. And with that, I would like to pass it off to Mr. Evans, Director of the Office of Real Estate.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. Eric Evans, Department of Real Estate in the Comptroller's Office. First, I'd like to thank the Ways and Means Committee for having us here today, and also show my appreciation to the Council President's Office for working closely with us to establish this hearing. We hope this hearing promotes good discussion today and some feedback and comments and suggestions to how we can make this work best for your communities and your constituents. Next slide. Yeah, first I'd like to start, we're gonna start with an overview of the department and an overview of the tax sale program and how vendor lien fits into the program. And well, first, the mission of the Department of Real Estate is to improve the quality of life in Baltimore. We're dedicated to improving the quality of life and providing best services possible and expertise, transparency, in real estate transactions, including acquisitions, disposition, and leasing. Overall, at this point, I'd like to say one of our main goals that we try to really live by is accountability and transparency. That's the thinking behind revamping this program. I'll start the next time. So this is the timeline of the tax sale process. There is the initial tax sale generally happens in May. Sometimes it could happen depending on when the actual sale happens. It could be June, but usually it's an annual tax sale that's run by the Department of Finance, and it's actually an auction, an online auction. Next is October. In October, what happens is something what we call the bulk tax sale. This is handled by the Department of Housing and Community Development and Department of Finance. Really what happens is these properties get taken out of the initial sale by DHCD for various purposes. It could be that DHCD has a larger plan for the area that these properties fit into, and if they fall into tax sale, they like to guide how these properties are disposed of and include them in a larger plan. Next is all the remaining tax sale properties that are unsold. This is where the vendor lien process tends to come in, because these are properties that either the amount of liens outweigh they're much higher than the assessed value, and so they're not desirable properties to buy. So they end up with us in the Department of Real Estate. I'd like to go over, next slide, this is the traditional way the tax sale works. So the auction happens, and certificates are available. They're issued. The issue date is going to be the date of the actual tax sale. So usually these dates are going to be either May or June. This example here, we have 32 Wallaby Way. This is illustrating what appears on what we call a lien release worksheet. So there's the flat tax and water lien of $3,000, $3,054, an environmental control board citation, alley, footway paving bills, and totaling up to $10,452. And the straight tax sale, that's what the purchaser will buy the certificate for, and then they will proceed to the foreclosure process to obtain the deed to the property. That's the way that works. And then, the next slide, we get to the vendor lien program. It's important to understand that the vendor lien program is really a subset of the tax sale program. It's a tool used to get properties back onto productive tax rolls, and these properties always, the liens exceed the assessed value. Important to remember that. So what happens here in this example, you've got a total tax of $7,745. The water is another $1,431. Environmental control, citations. You've got miscellaneous tax bills. You've got liens totaling here now $16,000, over $16,000, when you only have an assessed value of $7,000. The sale price you see at the bottom here is $175. The way we get to that number is we take the greater of the flat tax and the water bill, or the assessed value, whichever one is greater is the sale price. The flat tax and water are the two liens that by law we cannot abate. And when we say flat tax, that means a tax without the penalties and the interest, and as well as the water. That's what your bill is, if we take away all of the penalties and interest that have accrued over the years. Next slide. So, this slide, okay. So here, I think we talked about, I think I discussed before that the certificates are usually dated either May or June when the sale happens. Much of this timeline is dictated by how fast or slow the court system works, unfortunately. What happens here is once the certificate is purchased, the purchaser has to file for foreclosure in circuit court. What they're doing there is they're saying this is, they're filing to foreclose on the property. The city has given them this certificate. They now stand in the place of the city, and they've got the right to foreclose on this property and perfect a deed. So what they have a timeline there. So there's going to, when you foreclose on the property at that time, there's going to be when you purchase the certificate, there's a 2-year timeline that kind of gets confusing because it's not from the date that you actually purchased the certificate, it's the date printed on the top of the certificate that is the 2 years. So say it appeared in a May tax sale and you don't purchase the certificate until November. You have 2 years from May, not 2 years from November, to foreclose on that property. You've got within 90 days of the judgment, you have to submit the proposed deed to Department of Finance and the Law Department. At that time, the purchaser will have to pay any subsequent liens that accrued on the property. And this is where it gets a little sticky because some people do not realize that even though you've purchased a tax sale certificate and even had those liens waived, it's the liens that were on there when you actually purchased the certificate. And this is why it requires a level of sophistication and understanding of how this process works, because your liens still begin to accrue from the time you purchase the certificate to foreclosure, and you are responsible for those liens. The next part of the timeline gets into the change part of this. So I'm not going to discuss that at the moment. What I'm going to do is I don't have slides for these 2 points that I'm going to make, but I feel they're very important to make them. The first is, why did we pause the program? We paused the program because our research showed, when I came on board a year ago, I looked at this and I saw that certificates were being sold and ending back up in the tax sale with nothing being done to the property. So we started, I had myself and my team started doing some research into why this was the case. So these properties were not effectively being brought back to the tax rolls or productive use. And the transactions were not being properly tracked. Therefore, we lacked the data to show the results of this program. And at that time, I went to the comptroller and asked him, I said, well, what's the goal of this program? Are we here to just sell these certificates? or are we here to bring properties back to productive use? I was given the latter is the answer. So I said, okay, please allow me to stop the program for a moment. I need us to figure out how are we going to add two things to this: accountability and transparency. The transparency is done through tracking data. The accountability is going to be done by we're going to be adding what we're calling a sales agreement with the purchase of a tax sale certificate, in which we are going to be asked to use the vendor lien program to waive these liens. That gets us into the next question, which is, what are we changing? Department of Real Estate worked closely with the law department and consulted with the Department of Finance and DHCD to develop a sales agreement. We also solicited feedback from frequent users of the program to help guide us in developing this agreement. In this agreement, we will require the purchaser to enter into this contract in exchange for abating the liens. The purchaser agrees to a timeline that's provided in the sales agreement. Timeline roughly is they have to complete the foreclosure within 2 years. Within 90 days after receiving the judgment, the purchaser must submit the proposed deed to the law department and the finance department. At this time, the purchaser must pay any subsequent liens placed on the property. The purchaser must obtain use and occupancy permit prior to the second anniversary of the judgment date. Next slide, please. So we get into default. So the first item here is, this is really a function of law by the fact that these certificates expire within 2 years of the date of the original stamp date of the sale. Nothing we can do about it, can't extend it. It is dead after that, if they have not foreclosed by that time. Bless you. So yeah, the next items, that is what comes into play in the sales agreement that we're doing. The purchaser must present the deed for approval to the Department of Finance and the law department. And they have to obtain a use and occupancy permit within that 2-year time frame. Of course, we understand that there are instances where a purchaser may need extra time in terms of getting the use and occupancy permit, and at that time, I can grant up to a year extension on the time, so that would give them about 3 years. Also, we are going to be seeking in the next General Assembly session other legislative ways that we can provide additional enforcement tools. Really, I'm speaking to the fact that we can't attach, by law, we're not allowed to attach this to the deed. We can create the law, we can create the contract, and we can record it. And the recordation is really, right now, our ability to enforce it. We are going to enhance our tracking abilities through a program that we use now called Slate. Slate has an ability that we haven't been using for this program, but we are going to be using it to provide a tickler system where we will be checking in with the purchaser at various points in this timeline. Our goal in checking in is not only to make sure the purchaser is adhering to the guideline, but also to check in to see are you having a problem in permitting? Maybe we can help. Are you having a problem with something else in the process? Maybe we can help. So I'd like to be more proactive in understanding where these certificates go and what the outcomes are. Next, impact. Vindalene program, it's critical to revitalizing our neighborhoods and our properties. These properties have been, in some cases, sitting there for 20 years. And for the reason of they keep going back into the tax sale, taxes are assessed, penalties, interest, all kinds of other environmental liens, and it's nothing but a blight on the community. So we're hoping to address this issue and be able to have some quantifiable data to say, this is the value of what we're doing here. And this is the number of properties. Now, this is not to say that these properties aren't currently, there are some developers and some investors that are doing a great job at bringing these back to productive use. Unfortunately, I have no ability right now to track other than anecdotal and the some of the kind folks that will show us pictures of some of the work that they do. So this is, we view this as a vital tool for unlocking the potential of these properties. In closing, we will be relaunching this program by the end of this year, and we'll be following up with an application that'll go live on into the Buy Into Be More site. With that, I'll say thank you again for allowing me to present this and welcome any questions and comments.
Thank you. Mr. Comptroller, do you or your team have anything else you'd like to add to Mr. Evans' presentation?
I believe not, although, no, I think we would just be happy to hear feedback from the council in the form of questions or comments.
Okay, we're going to do something a little slightly different today. Colleagues, if there's no concerns, that we only have 2 people signed up to testify. I'd like to hear what those folks have to say, and then we can get into questions with the agencies. Does anyone have any concerns with that? Excellent. So we'll start off with Mr. Deontay Gordon. And Mr. Gordon, if you could just hit the bottom right button on the microphone, your ring will light up red. And then this is flexible. Just make sure you're about 6 inches away from, a little further.
That's good right there.
Yep, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of council. My name is Deontay Gordon, and I'm a resident of the Oliver community, and I work as a developer in Baltimore City. The why and why we need the vendors lien program. Baltimore City has long faced the challenge of vacant homes and urban blight, which undermine community stability, economic growth, and public safety. Rehabbing these vacant properties is a crucial strategy under this program for revitalizing neighborhoods and improving the overall quality of life for residents. This process involves transforming neglected and abandoned properties into habitable homes, thereby reducing blight, attracting new residents, and fostering community pride. One of the primary benefits of rehabbing vacant homes is the direct impact of reducing urban blight. Blight refers to the visible and physical decline of a neighborhood characterized by abandoned buildings, overgrown lots, and deteriorating infrastructures. These conditions can lead to increased crime, decreased property values, and a diminished sense of community. By rehabilitating vacant homes, the city can eliminate the eyesores that contribute to blight, making neighborhoods more attractable and livable. This program can have a ripple effect, encouraging adjacent property owners to maintain and invest in their properties, further enhancing the neighborhood's appearance and stability. My experience with the program showed that the real estate department did a thorough analysis of each investor who applied. We had to provide a detailed scope of works, timelines, contractor experience. If you was not a contractor, you had to list a licensed one on your application for your project, a summary of previous real estate transformations and experience, made sure that all your properties owned that was in good standing with the city. My success with the program allowed me to turn blighted properties that was falling apart and needs a major redevelopment and turn them into beautiful homes that always leave people with the same comment once I show them the after photos of the renovations. This house can't be in Baltimore. This house looks like some off of HGTV. Well, I'm here to tell you it is. Economic revitalization is another significant advantage of rehabbing vacant homes. These properties are often abandoned due to high tax liens, foreclosure, economic downturns, or population decline, can be repurposed to meet current housing needs. Renovated homes provide affordable housing options for low and moderate income families, fostering a more diverse and inclusive community. Additionally, the rehabilitation process generates local employment opportunities in construction, real estate, and related industries. The influx of new residents and businesses also contributes to a broader tax base, providing the city with increased revenue to invest in the public service and infrastructure improvements. In conclusion, rehabbing vacant homes in Baltimore City under the Vendors Lane program is a vital strategy for reducing blight and revitalizing communities. The transformation of these properties into habitable homes not only enhance neighborhood aesthetics and safety, but also stimulates economic growth and community cohesion. By fostering collaboration among various stakeholders and implementing effective policies, Baltimore can turn its vacant homes into assets that contributes to the city's overall prosperity and well-being, and that's why we need the Vendors Lanes program. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bree Jones. This is twice in 2 weeks.
I know.
Good to see you.
I was going to say, I will not make it a third time. Good morning, Ways and Means Committee. My name is Bree Jones. Thank you to Comptroller Henry and Mr. Evans for inviting me to provide testimony. I've had the benefit of partnering with your department for the last 2 or 3 years, and we've used the vendor lien program to great success. So Parity Homes is an equitable development company based out of West Baltimore. And this morning, I went back into our database to pull accurate statistics so that I can give a very accurate sense of how the vendor lien program works to moving vacant and dilapidated buildings back to productive use. This testimony may be lengthy. I know I have 2 minutes, but if you bear with me, I have a lot of nuggets in here. The first is that Parity only buys the tax debts of vacant and abandoned properties. We filter out any tax certificates that are owner-occupied homes, and I'll get into that a little bit later, why not, but the purchase of tax debts and foreclosure of owner-occupied homes has a huge burden on the city, both from a social and an economical perspective. Parity has purchased 58 certificates over the last 3 years, 40 through the annual auction, and 18 through the vendor lien release program. Of the 40 that I purchased through the auction, only 8 actually went to foreclosure, meaning that I was able to foreclose the right to redeem, so that's 20%. Of the 18 that I purchased through the vendor lien release program, 11 have moved to deed. So that's 61%. So even though I purchased fewer vendor lien certificates, there was a 3 times higher rate of them foreclosing, demonstrating a much higher success rate than the annual tax auction. Just for some of our statistics of the 19 we closed, 2 have finished renovations, 4 are under permit for construction, and 10 will have permits underway in the coming months as we close on our next round of capital. So part of some of my theories around why purchasing through the vendor lien release program is more effective than purchasing at auction is that the properties that go to auction tend to have lower delinquent tax rates. They tend to be owners who maybe missed one tax payment. It's maybe below $1,000, and that those owners are more likely to redeem on those debts. Whereas with the vendor lien release program, these debts are in the tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it just really lowers the likelihood that someone will redeem on those debts. The other reason why the auctions just are not really effective, at least for bringing properties back to productive use, is that really it's speculators who are engaging in the auction, who are looking to just use that auction as an investment vehicle to earn 12 to 18% on their purchase with the expectation that the owner redeems. So it really is kind of a short-term investment vehicle rather than a desire to foreclose on that property. And for speculators who do ultimately foreclose on properties, they tend to purchase properties that are still standing, that you can kind of move someone in right away. You can kind of evict the person that lives there, flip it, and move someone in right away. They're not looking to purchase severely dilapidated buildings that are going to need $200,000 to $300,000 of capital investment to bring back to productive use. Another great thing about the vendor lien program is that it is just very cost effective. So across our costs from purchasing the certificate to hiring an attorney and all of the legal fees throughout are about $15,000 to $20,000 versus $35,000 to $60,000 in purchasing a property on the private market. So trying to reach out to the owner directly and negotiating a private sale. So for Parity, we've again been able to really grow our portfolio of properties in a way that we wouldn't otherwise using the vendor lien release program. So I have a couple of suggestions. I think what Mr. Evans has laid out makes a lot of sense. We spoke about this earlier this year, and they asked for my feedback. A couple of additional suggestions would be to remove owner-occupied homes entirely from any form of tax sale, whether it be vendor lien release or auction. Only 1% of the annual revenue that comes to the city from tax sale is encompassed in owner-occupied homes. And the cost of evicting our most vulnerable legacy, oftentimes elder Black residents, the cost to social services just outweighs any potential benefits in tax income. And the option would be to refer those homeowners that are in distress and tax distress to great organizations like the SOS Fund or the Maryland Volunteer Lawyer Services so that they can get support, they can get on a payment plan to stabilize their housing expenses. The second suggestion would be to move all unsold tax liens to a land bank or some similar entity to foreclose on those debts through in rem foreclosure and to package and bundle those sales for mission-oriented developers to get them back to productive use. A lot of tax liens cycle again and again and again, and it's just not an effective use of taxpayer dollars. The third suggestion would be to bolster and educate the courts. If you will allow me, I have an anecdote. So Parity purchased a tax certificate on a building that clearly was in structural distress. We could see very clearly that it was at the imminent risk of collapse. We petitioned the court, hey, we have this tax certificate. Will you allow us to go in and stabilize the building at our own expense, but you tack that expense to the lien so that if the owner chooses to redeem, they'd have to pay us back for the cost of stabilization. The court rejected our petition, and within months, the building collapsed. We ultimately did foreclose on the certificate, so we now own the property, but we had to, receive that property partially collapsed, and the cost to rebuild the collapsed facade was $40,000, whereas if the court had allowed us to stabilize it to begin with, it would have only been a $5,000 fix. And so really educating the courts on how to be partners to developers on the ground during the tax lien process is critical. And lastly, until a land bank or some similar entity is created, the process is incredibly slow. As much as, I know every single person in the comptroller's office, whether it's Miss Monique or Miss Lamella, but it takes about 3 months from beginning to, like, when I ask, hey, can I purchase these three vendor lien certificates, to when the office gives me the certificate and I can begin the court proceedings. And so my suggestion would be to invest in technology and more people to speed up the process within the comptroller's office to make the vendor lien release program more efficient. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Are there any other members of the public who wish to testify on this before we get into questions from council members for the administration and the comptroller's office? Any other members of the public who wish to testify? Okay, start Vice President Middleton, go down the line.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. I noticed it was unless I missed it, you did a brief statement about NREM, and I think I'd like to hear you elaborate more. Why not partnering with that program process? Because the city has been working on that process for a long time, and I feel that it's probably faster and cheaper to follow that process.
Well, first, the IMRIN process is handled through Department of Housing and Community
Correct.
Development, but it's also a process of we're selling certificates. We're not actually, INREM is when you actually have ownership of the property, taking ownership of the property. But I'm not quite sure, when you say partner with, what do you mean by?
So I know they have a process with their properties for, I guess, on tax sale foreclosure.
Right.
And having the tax sale purchaser reimburse the city costs for acquisition plus a sale price based on the cost equal to the vendor lien. Has that been investigated or talked about with housing?
No, we haven't really, but.
I think the best way to put it into those terms is to say that these are two different tools that the city uses to deal with slightly different situations in terms of the in terms of a troubled property. And so HCD has their in-rem process to handle some of those houses. Houses that have gone, the only properties that vendor lien, the vendor lien program is used on are properties that have already gone through tax sale and nobody bought the certificate. So if it went through tax sale and nobody bought the certificate, and then it went through the bulk sale, through that HCD does after the main tax sale, and still nobody bought it. I hesitate to use the expression the bottom of the barrel, but they are the properties that did not go at earlier points. And so now we're gonna do what we can to find ways to make them developable and make them attractive to developers. So INREM still, I mean, we work with HCD on these in the sense that they're dealing with other properties and we're dealing with these, but I don't know that there is a allowable legal process where we could say, you know what, instead of dealing with the tax sale certificate on this property, we're just going to use INREM to take possession of it.
Because in the INREM process, you have to actually take possession, the city takes possession of the property.
And we're not trying to be the ones owning it.
So it sounds to me like maybe legislation could be put in to help work with that process together.
Maybe.
Mr. Chair, can I answer this question?
Could it, I see a representative from housing. That don't mean to put you on the spot.
Come on now.
Yeah,
Kate,
I'm no
now-
longer with housing, I'm with the law department now.
I'm sorry.
So, but, I mean, do you want me to elaborate some? I mean, I think that with in-rem foreclosure, DHCD through the bulk sale does identify the properties that it intends to acquire through in-rem foreclosure. And then also, whenever the comptroller's office is selling certificates, they reach out to DHCD to make sure that these are not properties that DHCD is interested in acquiring. So I think in that way, it is working together. DHCD, of course, there's a limited capacity on how many in-rem foreclosures they can do. So this allows them to strategically do the ones that they are targeting for their impact investment areas and for the different purposes. And then this also gives a process for those abandoned properties, specifically for abandoned properties, to be purchased at a lower cost by individuals who want to do the tax sale foreclosure. Well, not tax sale, yeah, the tax sale foreclosure on them by themselves. So I think it is coordinated. And
I'm just kind of feeling that the timeline for the cash flow of just trying to get that resolved is not improved. It still seems to be a long, outdrawn process, imagining the vacant property still here. You know, still sitting there. It's just still a long process. And I think that's what I guess we're interested in, is just trying to, what's a way to do things cheaper and faster?
Well, I mean, if I was going to opine on the process as a whole in a very big picture sort of way, I would lay a lot of this at the feet of our colleagues in Annapolis and say that there are a lot of people who believe heavily in property rights of individuals. And those people have always been very successful at lobbying in Annapolis. So it is very difficult whenever government in general is trying to take away somebody's property. Like that, it is deliberately not easy to have government take someone's property. And historically, that was the worst penalty anybody could think of for someone who did not behave properly with their property, did not treat it right, did not take care of it. The worst possible thing they could come up with was government will take your property away from you. And then once they've come up with that awful, awful, awful penalty, then they did everything they could to make it hard for government to actually do that quickly, because they didn't really ever want it to happen. But all of that was centuries ago, and we now have situations where people do not behave responsibly with their property to the point of just walking away from it. And government is left effectively responsible for it in terms of the expectations of the community. Even if we don't legally own it, people expect us to do something about it. They expect us to take it away from the people who legally own it but have not behaved properly with it. And at the end of the day, I don't know that there's ever going to be but so much we can do. We can come up with ways where we can find ways to expunge liens faster. We can look for ways to hold developers accountable when they do have these certificates. But at the end of the day, so much of this is the intersection of state law and the courts, which are funded and run by the state, in terms of how many days do they require for each notification of each step of this process. I think that you raise a good point in terms of this is something that we definitely need to continue to find ways to address. But I think that this is definitely also something we should be reaching out to our delegation in Annapolis for and working with them. And I would welcome the opportunity to, I suspect in their absence, I'm not going to speak for, I was going to say, I'm not going to speak for HCD, but I suspect that we would both be excited at the prospect of the council and the General Assembly working together to make state law more amenable to the city moving properties out of the hands of bad actors and into the hands of good actors faster. Yeah.
Thank you. And I do see Nina, if she would make note that it would be a good conversation to really have with our state delegation too. I think that's what's going to help push, I guess, the timeline of how we do these things, because I have, and we all can attest to this, we have properties in our neighborhoods that's been sitting for 30, 40 years. And then the acquisition process is like a 10 or more year process, especially if you're giving hope to a developer and then you find that that developer doesn't have, you know, the money, but you still give them it's all very time consuming, and yet still the property is still sitting there vacant and an eyesore. And so, yes, I do think it's time that we do have the conversation with our state delegation, because some old laws have to be updated and changed, especially with what you're presenting as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Stokes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we talked about tax sale and those things, and one question came up, and I know how hard housing work in terms of the permit process. What difference in you working with the administration and housing on that permit process? Because I got a gentleman right here, he waited for a permit for 6 months. So we coming up with this lien program, but is the permit process going to be better? Because right now, sometimes it's very difficult. So I'm asked, maybe Controller Henry can, so you're working with the administration on housing and how we make that more friendly to developers in the city.
Yes, I'm not going to say I'm happy, okay, but it is very clear to me that for that particular concern, I should, I believe the expression is drop back and punt that directly to HCD, because I mean, we don't have any control over the permitting process. We partner with HCD in many ways, but if you or your constituents, even if they're the same customers for the vendor lien program, have concerns about the permit process, yeah, that is something where that's entirely under the control of HCD, and we're of course happy to support them in any way if there's some way we can be helpful. But yeah, you'd need to have Commissioner Kennedy or someone from her staff here to take that on in detail.
Well, Mr. Controller, I only said because this is the vendor lien program, I think you should be talking with housing in terms of how we make that process a little better. I'm not asking your office to change it, but work with housing so we can make it a little better. Because I made
we're happy. I mean, I think we do have a fairly good communication thing going back and forth in terms of if people give us feedback that was permit related, we would just pass that on and make sure HCD got that information.
We do, and then it's usually a case-by-case basis. If someone comes to us and says, well, wait a minute, we're having a hard time here with the permitting process, we will pick up the phone and call folks at HCD and maybe help, maybe somewhere in the process there's a misunderstanding and that certain documents aren't provided, and there's things such as plans. And
well, I'm talking more about some legislation working with HCD in your office to actually make that process a little more lenient. And the suggestion was Deputy Commissioner Jason Hessler was here because Ms. Breeze Jones, if you talk about when you get developers property and you start to see property falling in the city because the houses are old, you can come up with 2 permits, demo, and the second permit should be demo and stabilization. Because what happens is if you demo a building, now you gotta go back through the process to get a permit to do the stabilization. By the time you do that, the building done fell. So the suggestion is, can we now have two different kind of permits? Demo, and one is demo and stabilization. And I'm sure there's a lot of developers that know that some of the property, you hear about buildings falling all over the city, because then you gotta go back and put another permit for stabilization. By the time you do that, if you got a house been vacant for 20 years, I mean, the house might fall on somebody or just fall. My suggestion is, why don't we have a permit also says demo and stabilization too? That can be done. And I believe that we'll see less buildings when somebody's developing a city, either gonna fall on somebody, or if it rain, they just fall. Maybe Mr. Controller, maybe there's something in your office. I don't mind working on it, but I made that suggestion before. Demo and stabilization permits should be part of the permit process. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee members. Thank you to the comptroller and comptroller staff. I know you've worked super hard on this. If I might, I just wanted to add a little bit relative to the Vice President's question. We still have tax sale as we know it. So until we reform tax sale as we know it, we're going to have these two parallel systems. One of DHCD putting properties into INREM when the liens exceed the value of the property, and they are specifically picking properties for redevelopment in certain areas, and then this program, and there's a few others as well. And ideally, frankly, we would get rid of tax sale as we know it and work on being the relationship being between the person who hasn't paid the taxes and the city as opposed to a third party. And so if that does occur, then all of the vacant properties with the liens exceeding the value of the property would go directly to INREM and would not come to the vendor lien program. So eventually, if we do this right, we will not need the vendor lien program. We have not had success yet in Annapolis to change our entire system. We are working through it. We still have to have payment plans, et cetera. One of the other issues around the timeline with vendor lien is that the foreclosure process, the tax sale foreclosure process is such that we actually worked hard in advocating in Annapolis years ago to make what's called the redemption period, where someone can pay the person back for the lien that they just bought, 2 years, to give homeowners that opportunity to do that. We've actually started the process of working with General Assembly to say maybe for vacant and abandoned properties that should be 1 year because nobody's paying anyway, and so why wait that long, right? So there, to the comptroller's point, there's some work to be done there. But I do think that all in all, if we do all of this right, with the vacancy tax, with reforming tax sale, all of the vacant and abandoned, and we improve the capacity, whether it's through DHCD or a land bank, all the vacant properties would go through the INREM process because it is faster. The courts are figuring it out, and that's good. So in the meantime, we have this program because we need it. I'm grateful that the comptroller's office has taken the opportunity to kind of review, what's going on with the program, because we do get folks coming in and saying, hey, couldn't buy it at tax sale, but it didn't end up selling and it didn't end up foreclosing. Can we go ahead and buy it through the vendor lien program? So I do appreciate that. So I have I have a couple questions. One is, you mentioned that there will be a purchase agreement with the buyer after you negotiate the sale. And I wondered, it sounds like this will help us with tracking success. But I did not hear anything around enforcement. So let's say somebody purchases the certificate. They do foreclose within those 2 years, although I have to say that would be lightning speed for the courts, but that's a separate issue we'll deal with another day. And then don't get a use and occupancy in 2 or 3 years. And so what happens? Does it sit there, or do you take it back? Or does it go back into tax sale? Because technically they foreclosed and then they didn't do anything about it. So what happens?
What That's where when I mentioned that we are going to be going to the General Assembly to try to change the law to allow us to attach this to the agreement, to the deed. At the moment, we can't. But what we can do is we can come after them in contract. It is a contract.
Okay, so it would still be, we wouldn't necessarily put in a clawback, but it would be part of the contract that you can
Correct.
still enforce through contract law. Great,
Yes.
great, okay.
And the value is in the contract.
Got it. Perfect. Okay. The other piece was around the qualifications of the person purchasing the property. I want, obviously we know of Parity, we know that they have a great track record, and we know that they're going to do the job. How is the comptroller's office pre-qualifying folks so that you're not just giving it to somebody random, which is what one of the problems with tax sale foreclosure is, because it goes to a random person that may not be doing anything within the interest of the city.
So that is one of the problems that we do face, but there is an application process, and we do require various proof that you have the financial ability and the experience to do this. Hence why we're instituting this agreement so we can go a step further, because we do know that in some cases folks will show us income statements or bank statements that might be true today that are not necessarily true 2 years from down the road. And that's why we're putting these tracking mechanisms to help enforce that. But we can do so much in the beginning to vet. We can, we're asking for proof that you can do this. And you have to show us a track record and show us financial capability.
Is that written anywhere where somebody comes in and says, yep, I'm interested in this property, and then you go checklist, do they have, is it $90,000 similar to DHCD, or is it just proof of that they have something?
I'm not sure the actual dollar.
Is it, that they have any other VBNs in the area? I mean, we've seen very transparently what they have on Buy into Be More for what the qualifications are. So I'm just curious if you're using the same ones or if there's something different.
I believe we're using the same, very similar, the same ones.
And where would that be found so that people would know?
I think it's on the application that we give you.
Okay. Because one of the things that we are finding in some instances, not necessarily with Buy into Be More, but in receivership is, people have to have a good track record. They may have some properties that still have VBNs on them because they're working through a process of acquisition in order to be able to do a whole block, let's say. But they've done other development. So I would hate to just have people who don't have VBNs, because then the problem is you get people creating all these new LLCs and they, not necessarily are doing the work that they're supposed to be doing, nor do they have a track record. So I would like to actually see that, and I'll ask for that as a committee request, yes.
Councilwoman, you've got me thinking now about about situations where communities and their representatives and council people have had bad experiences with a developer, and then they are various levels of surprised, upset to find that even after having that bad experience, HCD continues to give that developer or sell that developer additional properties. And so I guess what I'm asking is that one of the things that you're interested in, where would it be a benefit for the vendor lien program to involve the Office of Real Estate also keeping a list of people who have been problematic in dealing with communities over development projects that weren't completed, and using that list to help determine whether or not to sell certificates to people?
Right, I think that that is something that should be done, as well as some engagement. I mean, I get that these are one-off properties, one-off for the most part, but you know, if there's not that engagement. Again, there are people that we know are going to do the job, like Parity. You don't need to worry about that. You know that if there's a trusted partner that's coming to you to say, we need this, that, the other property, you working with DHCD to say, hey, they're acquiring properties for development. Yep, absolutely, right? You have that. But then you've got other folks that are just going to come to you, especially if it's on the Buy Into Be More website. So I do think that there needs to be some transparency and some, engagement on that, so that there could be community outcomes in this. Otherwise, the program ends up being exactly what tax sale has become, which is, the highest bidder gets the property or gets the lien, forecloses, and then, we may not have community outcomes, or we just kicked out grandmom. So I don't, that's all I'm saying, is that there has to be that engagement.
Well, I would say I would definitely encourage council people on behalf of their communities to proactively provide that kind of feedback. So whenever you have a bad experience with a developer in one of your communities, let us know. And that allows us to sort of build a larger awareness of the players. And if you have a problem with, John Smith, and it turns out that John Smith should, send in an application to purchase some properties in a different part of the city, that gives us, if we know we should be keeping our eyes open for John Smith, then we can reach out to both the council person who told us about John Smith, and we can reach out to the council person who represents the area where the properties are being applied for, and we can say, you guys should talk because you had this experience with them before, and now they're trying to do something in your district.
I would also suggest that the comptroller's office, when you get an application, you need to confer with DHCD, okay? To say, hey, is this property going to be part of a redevelopment strategy?
We do.
And if you do that, that's great.
That's part of the process. That's before anything we actually.
Because I think, especially now that DHCD is doing this, they're doing this RFQs now for partners in certain areas that can be development partners. Those would be your priority if they, I have some questions about how they're doing it, but that's beside the point. So, but you know what I mean? Because I think that, in the last hearing we had last week, a lot of people were talking about transparency, and this program right now is not transparent. So I think that if you're going to do it until we reform tax sale and do not need this program, which probably won't be for another few years, there has to be that engagement, there has to be that transparency. And so that's what I would ask. And then, that way residents also know, like, there's an agreement with this guy who's supposed to do this with it, and then you can, monitor that with the community as well. So I appreciate that. We did talk about the transition within REM. Right now, it's really at the bulk sale, because the DHCD can withhold properties in order to take them into to INREM as well. So I do appreciate the work that's been done here on this, and look forward to continue to work with you on this. Thank you.
Council Vice President Middleton.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ramos, for initiating more partnerships, or a stronger partnership through this whole process with housing. It's just so important. I did have a question, but it just slipped by me that quick. So, God, I'm trying to think. It was something on my mind, but I'll hold that thought and maybe do that offline if it comes back. But that's basically what I want to see, that strong partnership. And I guess that's something that in the future you should really put in your PowerPoint too, just to kind of visually see that there is some partnering going on as we, especially since we're dealing with housing needs. Thanks.
Thank you for the feedback, the comments, and next time I will make it more clearer that we do work hand in hand with HCD on a lot of this. We have to speak with their lawyers and everyone else to make this process work. Yeah.
Thank you. I have one last question. There was a situation in my district where somebody wanted to purchase one of the lots that is in the inventory, or was. The certificate has since expired. And so what is going to be the turnaround when someone applies and, you know, you let them know that they'll be able to purchase that lien? What's the turnaround? Because obviously the timeline from the time of when the tax sale occurred and when the foreclosure is supposed to happen is not much time, and we have the court problem too. So what is going to be that turnaround? Because what happened in my district, it was like 3 months after the person heard, and then the certificate expired.
That is a very good question. And that speaks to part of our process is when we do get these requests, we do submit them to DHCD, and they do have to sign off. There has not to shift the blame or point fingers, but one of the issues that we had faced in the last couple of years is that DHCD's legal staff was quite shorthanded and overwhelmed, and there was a backlog and of being able to review these applications that are coming through. And I think we're moving past. I see things moving quicker. I can't say exactly what the timeline's going to be, but I think what I'm seeing in the last few months since their staffing has changed in their law department, that things are moving faster than 3 months.
Okay, because I do think that's a factor as to why the vendor lien program has not been successful, is because of that time lag. Because then they don't have time to go to the courts to then foreclose. And as Ms. Jones had said in her testimony, we still have to do our job. We've done a great job together working with the courts on in-rem, and they have done a phenomenal job of really streamlining the process for in-rem in their, in their process. But tax sale foreclosure is still the same, and it's random, and it happens whenever. And so I do think that there's some work there that has to be done, and I don't know if you've talked with the courts about that at all, but we have a very streamlined process with them relative to in-rem. So I think that that's something to think about as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Colleagues, any other questions? Any other members of the public who wish to testify on this matter? Mr. Comptroller, I'll turn it to you if you have anything you want to add. Excellent. We are now in recess. Thank you.